webinar brought to you by OraSure Technologies. OraSure Technologies is a global leader in oral fluid substance abuse testing products. The assays provide accurate and easy-to-administer testing methods to determine the presence or absence of drugs or alcohol in a person's system. Oral-based testing products provide a simplified collection process for results, cost savings, with little risk of tampering and dramatically reduced risk of adulteration. INTERCEPT Oral Fluid Drug Test is an FDA-cleared laboratory-based oral drug testing system that enables accurate testing for 9 drugs of abuse, including marijuana, cocaine, PCP, amphetamines, methamphetamines, barbiturates, benzodiazepines, methadone, and opiates. It was as the #1 recognized brand name in oral fluid testing in a 2015 National Drug Testing Industry Survey. With a fast and easy-to-administer collection process, INTERCEPT is a for workplace, criminal justice, drug treatment centers, and clinical setting screening programs, among others. Today is entitled New Drug Testing Laws. It's time to get caught up, and will be presented by Bill Current of Current Consulting Group. The president of the Current Consulting Group, a national consulting firm that specializes in drug testing policy development and helping employees optimize their employee screening program. Here are the online ultimate guide to state drug testing laws at statedrugtestinglaws.com. Also publishes the e-newsletter State Drug Testing Laws Monthly. Mr. is the former executive director of the American Council for Drug Education and served as vice president of consulting for a national third-party administrator of testing and background screening services. He is our co-author of 10 books on substance abuse issues, including Why Drug Testing. He administers the annual drug industry survey, now in its 17th year, those which were presented at the conference this last fall. It's a pleasure to hear from Bill Current.
Well, thank you, Jessica, and welcome to everybody who has joined today's call. We're going to send out some slides to you, and you're going to get the slide. It tells a little bit about who we are, Current Consulting Group, but I'd like to start out by just acknowledging OraSure Technologies and thanking them for hosting sponsoring today's webinar. Today is our second to last webinar of the year. We have one tomorrow that we're hosting through the Current Consulting Group, and I think that's going to bring our total for the year up to about 60 or so webinars that we've hosted this year through our webinar hosting service, and we've done at least one every month with OraSure as the sponsor. And so I want to acknowledge OraSure for their commitment to bringing good quality information to the drug testing industry and helping people stay up to date on state testing laws, which we're going to talk about today, as well as developments in trends and other important issues that both drug testing providers and drug testing buyers know. A lot of what we're going to talk about today is information that we provide throughout the year through our program called statedrugtestinglaws.com. I looked over the list of people who registered for today's webinar. There were quite a few that I recognized as subscribers to statedrugtestinglaws.com, but we send out regular legislative updates on developments in drug testing legislation and bills that get passed and signed, enacted, and so some of it will be from those reports. We've added a lot of other information into the report. We're going to talk about the most of the bills that got passed this year at the state level that could affect drug-free workplace programs. Some of it's drug testing specific, some of it's more pertinent to people who are in the drug testing business. It may not be a drug-free workplace bill that was passed, but it may be a drug testing related bill that was passed that affect how providers of drug testing conduct their business and the various markets that they provide their services in. We'll also talk about the marijuana legislation for the year. It was an active year. Next year is going to be more active. I'll explain why as we get to that part of the presentation. And then we'll share just a little bit of information from this year's drug testing industry survey. As Jessica mentioned, this is our 17th annual survey. It was probably the best one yet, I think, just in terms of the type of information that people in the industry provided to us. to all as people in the industry and as people who purchase services from the drug testing industry, all of us a real good idea of where the industry's at, but really where we're headed with some of the key developments like the proposed guidelines from SAMHSA on lab-based oral fluid testing, expanded drug panels, things of that nature, all of that, and how it's going to play into deliver services and how we purchase services going forward. Tomorrow's webinar, which is open to anybody who would like to attend, it's a free webinar. It's going to be sponsored by Asia, the Current Consulting Group, and it's going to be on the results of the industry survey. So it's going to go into, I only have 5 or 6 slides on the survey today. We'll go into great detail tomorrow. So Jessica's going to send out a reminder to all who come on to today's webinar on how you can register for tomorrow's webinar if you'd like to get the real nitty-gritty details on this year's industry survey. The bulk presentation today, though, is on state legislation for 2015. A lot of it, we're going to talk about the bills that were passed. Some of them have already been signed by governors and acted. Not many of them have gone into effect yet, but some of them have. We'll talk about those things, and we're going to approach this sort of on alphabetical order. First, show you in 2014 these types of state legislation that were passed, and you can see the category that had the most activity was marijuana with 12. In 2015, there weren't as many bills passed. Marijuana was the most active in terms of legislation. But some of the bills that were passed this year were much more directly related to drug testing issues. And so we're going to just take it state by state. I've got a lot of information in here. I'm not going to be able to talk to every slide in detail. It would take too long. But we're going to send a link to these slides for anybody who wants them. You're going to get the link to the slides so that you can go through this at your leisure and review it with your colleagues, etc. If we don't cover, or if I don't cover today, a bill you heard about or something that you saw, something you had a question on, something a client brought to your attention, if I don't cover it today, then send me an email at bcurrent@currentconsultinggroup.com, bcurrent like in Bill, current, bcurrent@currentconsultinggroup.com, and we'll look up for you and send me an email and let you know what we found out, okay? So let's get started. Again, sort of in alphabetical order. So our back in March approved a bill that makes changes to the state DWI laws that essentially equate driving under the influence with voting under the influence. And so this may not affect most drug-free workplace type programs, for example, but if you're in the drug testing industry and you're providing services, you know, outside of traditional markets like the workplace or criminal justice, and you're into law enforcement or supporting law enforcement, this may be of importance to you. It does affect drug testing. It makes the connection between driving under the influence and voting under the influence. Also, Arkansas was a law passed affecting the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families law in that state to require applicants for such funding to admit to a drug test. In terms of the specimen, the definition is, quote, tissue, fluid, or a product of the human body. But it does not apply if the applicant has a valid prescription for the drug that they test positive for. But it does give a landlord the authority, so to speak, to deny housing to somebody who fails this test in Arkansas. Maybe not a traditional market, but more and more of these types of laws. And it's interesting because here in Florida I live, we saw one of the very first welfare drug testing types of laws passed. It was challenged. It was defeated through the legal system, and yet these types of welfare-related drug testing laws are popping up, continue to pop up every year throughout the country, often tied to employment. Somebody who is applying for type of government assistance with housing would have to show that they've been looking for a job and they can pass a drug test. But we saw there in Arkansas, but a lot of that now, because you can make more of a connection, a legitimate connection to that requirement, than just requiring welfare recipients to submit to drug testing. At least so far that has proven to be the case. Colorado approved a law back in May, or legislation back in May, that bans the use of public funds at marijuana retailers. This is important because as more states allow either marijuana users, or in Colorado, Washington, Oregon, Alaska, recreational users to purchase marijuana legally from legal distribution centers or marijuana stores, if you will. One of the key issues that has popped up, and Colorado is addressing it with this bill, is individuals using their food stamp cards or other types of federal fund assistance to marijuana at these retail outlets. And so this law actually, this is Colorado, will prevent recipients of food stamps and other types of government financial assistance, either state or from federal agencies, from using those funds to purchase, even though it's legal. This was a little bit more related to employment, but through the state's unemployment compensation law, this would prevent employers from being during the base period account of their unemployment account from being unemployment insurance when the claimant was either terminated, discharged, suspended from work for losing his or her license. This applies to truck drivers as a result of a failed drug or alcohol test while off duty. It specifically says a conviction for DUI in an automobile. So we're talking about licensed operators of over the trucks who are convicted of DUI in a vehicle and claim unemployment because their license has been suspended. And this prevents employers from being penalized and having that docked against their unemployment account. What you hear, just to point out, because we're going to see more of this in the next few slides, that third bullet category there is added to a number of slides so that you have a little bit more explanation straight from the legislation. So in some cases, you're going to see that I'm putting the actual legislative language into the slide or into an adjoining slide. I'm not going to read all of that to you, but I wanted you to have it when you get the slides so that you can you'll be able to read more about it. And if you want to, you can always, of course, just cut and paste Connecticut HB 6707 into a Google search and find the legislative language for the whole bill. Now, in a Connecticut bill, SB 193, which was approved back in June, it required laboratories that offer hair testing to perform tests. This was ordered by a certified physician, assistant, or an advanced practice registered nurse. And as you can see, I've put the language down there straight out of the bill itself. So this is a very narrow area of drug testing law, and it applies to laboratories, specifically to laboratories that are testing. But it would require them to comply with the request for a hair test if the order came from one of those three categories: certified physician, physician assistant, or an advanced practice registered nurse, and very specific, as you can see down below. Now, there are some specific license under Chapter 370 or under 378 of the general statutes. Those are the actual licensing requirements for physician assistants under Chapter 370, for licensed registered nurses under 378 for the state of Connecticut. You can read more about that, but the main thing is that it has to do with providing hair testing when a hair test is ordered by one of those three categories of professionals. This is interesting. So I've mixed in some of the marijuana laws that were passed with all the others, and then a whole section coming up on marijuana as sort of a summary of all the different legislation from 2015. But the HB 39 criminalizes the possession of 1 ounce or less of marijuana, makes it a civil penalty. It's not part of somebody's criminal record. It doesn't modify the driving under the influence law. It doesn't affect the state's existing medical marijuana law. It just has to do with the possession of marijuana. Okay, now I did put a little information about this on the slide. This is just a paragraph out of our we have for every state we have a chart specifically dedicated to the marijuana issue of that state. And in the chart for Delaware, this is the language: employers not required to permit working under the influence except that a registered qualifying patient, meaning a registered medical marijuana user, shall not be considered under the influence of marijuana solely because of the presence of metabolites or components of marijuana. So this law that we were just talking about, that was back in June, doesn't affect it at all. It really has no impact on the state's existing medical marijuana law. Why is this important, though? Well, because you have to be a medical marijuana user or a registered user for this law to apply to you. Basically, it's making it legal to possess an ounce of marijuana in the state of Delaware. And if you study the marijuana legalization issue, of course, this isn't not the grand prize if you're the Marijuana Policy Project normal. That applies to all drugs, not just marijuana. But to legalize marijuana for recreational purposes is the grand prize in the marijuana category. This is just a step towards that. So as you look at their strategy, you see that they're looking to decriminalize marijuana, to make marijuana legal for use, and then to make marijuana legal for recreational use. And so that's common. This step in that direction, even though Delaware already has a medical marijuana law, this is a step in the direction of legalizing marijuana generally. Okay. Now, Georgia. This got a lot of attention earlier in the year because it appeared on the surface to be a new medical marijuana law. If you read any of the pro websites, like Marijuana Policy Project, MPP.org, they didn't like this bill at all. Why? Because it doesn't allow use of regular marijuana. It allows the use of low THC oil for marijuana purposes, but it doesn't even allow for the purchase of THC oil in state. So it's a very weak, convoluted medical marijuana type of law. It doesn't, and there's specific language in this Georgia bill that was passed and has been signed that would not employers to make any type of accommodations for marijuana or the use of marijuana or people being under the influence of marijuana in the workplace. It's really some of the strongest workplace language that you'll find in any marijuana-related law. The opposite of what we see in, say, Minnesota, and certainly the opposite of what we see from last year's New York medical marijuana law. Again, the marijuana legalism folks, they're not happy with this, even though it does open the door somewhat. They don't consider this a key victory, and they don't consider this a medical marijuana state. Hawaii already has and had at the time that this law was passed in July, a medical marijuana law. This just prohibits the anti-discrimination language. This prohibits discrimination against medical marijuana users, solely on the fact that they're a medical marijuana user. And I put the language down there. It doesn't address the workplace issue, but it prohibits discrimination against medical marijuana patients and their caregivers by schools, landlords, courts with regard to medical care or parental rights, planned community associations, condominium property regimes, or condominiums. So this is out in society. It touched on the workplace issue. It didn't mention employers. I read again this morning just to make sure I wasn't missing that. So it's not so much an employer-based issue, but it does, again, affect the issue overall in the state of Hawaii and has a bearing on other states as well. Now, Illinois is, very unique when it comes to drug testing and drug abuse issues, and for a whole variety of reasons. One is the fact that there's no state drug testing law in Illinois, but there is a requires public works contractors with the state to have drug testing programs in place. And it defines the type of drugs that you should test for. It basically, is a DOT look-alike type of requirement there. In medical marijuana law with very good, if you're an employer, a very good or strong workplace provision in it that protects employers. This passed SB 1129, add synthetic drugs, K2, spice, bath salts, that type of stuff, to the state definition of controlled substances. So under the state definition of controlled substances, it, of course, doesn't affect the federal Controlled Substances Act or what's considered a controlled substance, but the state's definition of a controlled substance, these synthetic drugs are now included in that definition, which, for who's doing drug testing in the state of Illinois, it's a good thing. I mean, you could do synthetic testing before this, but legitimizes it in terms of it being included in the definition of controlled substances in the past have included marijuana, cocaine, opiates, etc. Louis, this is one. There are about 5, and I've mentioned one already. This is a second one that got a lot of attention this year. On the surface, it looks like one thing, but I'm going to explain what really happened in Louisiana. So this is HB 379. It was approved back in June. It does add hair testing to the state's drug testing law. So if you go back and you look at the Louisiana law, it's not as hair was prohibited, but it specifically adds hair to the state law and adds to the list of certified, approved, or permitted certified laboratories, not SAMHSA certified and CAP FUDT, so forensic urine drug testing certifications, but also the CAP FDT, the forensic drug testing, which is you're going to find laboratories that are certified to do hair testing. So not common still. There is a certification for hair testing in the United States, and it's offered by the College of American Pathologists. It's an FDT certification, the FUDT. The language, as you see there below there, adds that to the definition. Okay? Very clear. That's what it's all about. Yes, you can do hair testing in Louisiana, but use a laboratory certified by SAMHSA, which doesn't have hair testing certification yet, although, as I'm about to tell you, that's in the works, and a CAP FDT certified lab. That's the only lab you could use right now. Okay. In also, there was one of these sort of high CBT, that's cannabidiol, low THC medical marijuana laws passed. This really doesn't affect the workplace so much. In fact, I don't think there was any mention of the workplace in this law or this bill that was passed back in June. It does the adoption of rules and regulations at some future point, which would perhaps put into place provisions that affect the workplace. This is another example. There are about 23 or 24 states that have passed these types of laws, where it doesn't legalize the use of marijuana for medical purposes. It's usually THC oils, things of that nature. And so these are the people call high CBD, low THC medical marijuana laws. They don't really like them. They don't consider medical marijuana states. They need to push for full medical marijuana laws in these states. CBD or cannabidiol is the component within marijuana that some people believe provides relief to sufferers of different types of ailments, medical conditions, etc. And THC, of course, is the psychoactive ingredient in marijuana. So we're talking about high CBD, right? Because the argument in favor of marijuana that, relief to those who are suffering from cancer and MS and things of that nature. But THC, the psychoactive part of it, the part that some studies have shown can result in psychotic episodes and emergency room visits and things of that nature. So on the surface, it would make sense that if you're in favor of medical marijuana, you're in favor of high CBD and low THC, but the pro-marijuana people agree with that. And so basically this is yet a new high CBD THC oil type of law that was passed this year to go onto that list of about 24 states that have these types of laws in place. Any of these laws typically are on the list of states with medical marijuana laws. So if you go to the Marijuana Policy Project website, this is not going to be a state that they're celebrating about. And they're not celebrating about that particular bill being passed. Nebraska, LB 390 was signed by the governor back in May. It creates a medical marijuana pilot program through the University of Nebraska and Nebraska Medicine. This is not, again, a full-fledged medical marijuana program. It's a research program. Now, why am I telling you about this? If you're following the marijuana issue, which has a direct effect on the drug testing industry and on employers and others who employ drug testing, this is to know, because this is of the strategy of breaking down the barriers against marijuana legalization. Start with these research programs that approve medical marijuana for research purposes, the criminalization of the possession of marijuana, and even to an extent, even though the pro-marijuana people complain about these high CBD, the THC oil type laws like we talked about in Georgia, et cetera. No, they complain about that. That's, again, part of the way in which they start to bring down the barriers, and then the next thing will be to introduce legislation on marijuana, which I'm going to give you a lot more detail about here in a few slides. Nevada amended certain part of the state's workers' comp law, some of it related to drug testing directly. I've got, while I've got a couple of slides, I'm not going to take a lot of time to read them because, as you're going to see in the next few slides, it's kind of dense copy, but I want you to have it so you could refer to it quickly when you get these slides. And then if you want to go into more detail, you can. But the I put on the next two slides is the real heart and soul of this that was amended or passed in Nevada regarding, again, this is related to the state's workers' comp law. Okay, so there's drug test results to be made available to insurers and employers if requested, and it makes it possible, makes denial possible for being intoxicated instead of needing to prove proximate cause. So as you go to these two slides, you're going to see, I just put in there, again, it's dense copy. It's not, I'm not going to punish by reading all of this to you, but you have it so that you can go in and you can take a look at this. It's important. It's not unique. There are other states that have these types of laws when it comes to proximate cause and the role of drug test result in terms of denying somebody benefits. Not common at all, but it's a move in that direction when it comes to the state of Nevada. South Carolina, again, a state with a voluntary drug testing law, but this bill HB 3305 was approved back in June. It provides oral fluid testing for unemployment comp purposes, and it adds or changes the reference and tells you how old a lot of these state drug testing laws are. That it refers to NIDA certified labs. Well, it's been corrected now, and it refers to SAMHSA certified laboratories. So on this next page or slide, I provided the language straight out of the bill, and you can see where it has struck National Institute on Drug Abuse, and it's inserted instead United States Department of Health and Human Services, Substance Mental Health Services Administration, and SAMHSA, okay, in terms of the laboratory where this oral fluid testing would have to take place. This is, and I think I've got her. No, that's the only one on South Carolina. Let me go back to my first slide there. This is an example of something that we talked about. If you attend any of the webinars that we did back in June, July, August, after the proposed guidelines from SAMHSA came out, we did a series of webinars on the proposed guidelines. Then we did a series of webinars on the comments that were submitted on the proposed guidelines. We did long ago for DAISHA. And for the DAISHA magazine, for Focus, go take a look at it. I think you'll like it. It's just good. But an example of how those proposed guidelines are going to have a direct impact on state drug testing laws. State drug testing laws simply the issue of procedures and defer to, they'll use all kinds of different terminology, but they'll defer to the SAMHSA guidelines, they'll call it the DOD regulations, they'll call it Part 40, et cetera. They use a combination of those, sometimes not really always making complete sense, like in Illinois. But oral fluid testing in South Carolina, it's got to be through a laboratory that has been certified by SAMHSA. And as you see, it's said on the next section B, the SAMHSA or CAP, a CAP certified laboratory. Well, when these post guidelines are finalized, and we project that final guidelines will come out probably in the late spring, maybe around April, May. The motion, a period of time in which laboratories can achieve a SAMHSA certification for doing lab-based oral fluid testing. It's going to have a ripple effect in the state laws where you find language like what was just approved in South Carolina that requires an oral fluid test to be performed, laboratory certified to perform these tests that is certified by SAMHSA or by CAP. So you'll see this in numerous states. This is a good example of something that we predicted back at the time when these guidelines were being debated and when the proposed guidelines first came out. This is the first of many similar situations that you're going to see throughout the country. Okay, passed a law back in March and requiring drug tests for public assistance. There's a question that goes along with it. If somebody fails a test, they must go into rehabilitation if they want to maintain their public assistance. So far, it's still in effect there or goes into effect in Utah, but it's an example law that probably will be legally challenged. In Virginia, again, another example of a high CBD, low THC type of law. It does limit patients that can use THC oil to those with intractable epilepsy. But again, one of the 24 states that have these types of law. Washington State, of course, has legalized marijuana, first medical marijuana, then, of course, famously medical marijuana, recreational marijuana. But this just adds additional protections to the medical marijuana law for registered users of medical marijuana. It reinforces that employers are not mandated to accommodate marijuana use in the workplace. Now, and so there's a lot of that. I'm not trying to pass it. If you have questions about it, let me know. We can address them now or in an email after today's webinar. I'm going to get to these next two slides. U.S. Congress passed on December 4th, just a couple of weeks ago, a highway funding bill. This is a funding bill that covers a lot of different things, including infrastructure improvements and construction, things of that nature. So it's a big bill. It adds for commercial truck drivers. So written into this law was language that would allow hair testing. So that whole process that the oral fluid testing industry went through to get, and the Drug Testing Advisory Board, DTAB, to agree to and see the wisdom of or the benefits of oral fluid testing is passed by this process. Now, it only allows for pre-employment testing, but if you do pre-employment testing with hair, it would also possible for random testing also. This is important because you're going to see, I think, some challenges to this going forward. And I'm a proponent of hair testing. I think you're going to see some challenges as that last bullet starts to unfold, the development of guidelines for hair testing that are supposed to be more than 1 year after the date of enactment of H.R. 22. Much more to come on that. Also, the only state that really took a full-fledged run at legalizing marijuana in 2015 was Ohio. Ballot 3, it failed. It did not get the necessary votes to be enacted. It would have legalized marijuana for recreational purposes. There was some indication leading up to the vote that there was support for this. Unfortunately, there were two bills at odds with one another. I say unfortunately, if you're a pro-marijuana person, which would have created a monopoly of companies that could harvest marijuana and sell it throughout the state. So it divided the allegiance of the voters in Ohio, and the initiative Ohio Ballot 3 failed. It didn't include workplace provisions, drug testing provisions, etc. I think what you're going to see is a return of this in the coming year, and I'm going to switch marijuana now at about the halfway point in our webinar and talk more specifically about that. But I think in about 3 slides, you're going to see why we'll be Ohio looking at marijuana legislation again. And I just want to put a plug in for our StateDrugTestingLaws.com. We have individual charts, not only for every state's drug testing laws, including workers' comp and unemployment comp, but we have individual state laws charts for the marijuana issue. You'll get all this. You can look at it in more detail. This quote from the Marijuana Policy Project website, mpp.org. Total comprehensive bills to allow the medical use of marijuana in 2015, 19 states looked legalizing marijuana for medical use. Continue to quote, in addition to bills that would create workable medical marijuana cannabis laws with no limitation on strains, several states have considered laws that would likely be ineffective, conflicts with federal law, and or that allow only low THC strains of cannabis. These are the THC oil type laws that we talked about. The 6, Georgia, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Texas, Virginia, and Wyoming. Finally, several states considered modifying existing medical marijuana laws. The most far-reaching were in California and Hawaii. We talked about the Hawaii one in a little bit of detail there. Okay, so that was from the perspective of the Marijuana Policy Project. You can find a whole lot of information if you want to take the time to read it on their website. These are the different medical marijuana bills that were introduced in 2015, and you can see the status. So there's the bill name, SB 326 in Alabama, died, Florida died, Georgia died, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Mississippi, Missouri, they all died and died. So in Nebraska, for example, you see 643 actually passed the Senate once. 3 in the Senate were required. Then it adjourned for the year, but before the bill could be finally passed, and so it will come back for reconsideration in 2016. North Carolina's H78 still active. Pennsylvania, their SB3, it's actually HB 193 in this case, is now on the House floor. And so as of today, I didn't see a vote on that today, but that could still be passed before the year's over. It passed by a vote of 40-7 in the Pennsylvania Senate. Others died. Utah, a bill, SB 2559, fell one short passage in the state Senate there. Wisconsin's AB 224 is both a medical and what they call an adult use bill. That's recreational marijuana. In other words, making marijuana legal, period. Now, 2015, these are the states that looked at legalizing marijuana for recreational purposes, or what they like to call the adult laws. And you can, again, a lot of them died. Some of them still live, or in the case of Hawaii, for example, will carry over to 2016. This is sort of the battlefield, if you will, in 2016. And then the next is just a continuation of these states. If you do business in any of these states, if you're living in any of these states, you may be very aware of what was going on. But it's important to know these things because you may have to adjust to it. You may have to provide updates to your client's drug testing policies to account for changes in the marijuana language for a particular state. We just did a presentation on marijuana 2 weeks ago, one of our December webinars, and made the point that, and this is important because I've got some marijuana information coming up from this year's industry survey, but it's important because a lot of employers are confused, and we have found that a lot of drug testing providers are confused by the status of drug testing in states that have legalized marijuana. Now, there are many states that pass marijuana laws have specific language related to drug testing in those new laws. There are some. You have to be aware of that. You have to be aware of any restrictions or anti-discrimination language that may exist in a law that gets passed. And so we pulled that information if you're interested. Now, 2016, I think, will be one of the most active years ever in the history of the legalization movement, and that's because they are going to use this issue to generate turnout for the presidential election. That's already an established strategy. This will get a certain type of voter out, and it will bring people to the polls to vote, and in the process, they'll vote for president. We know that California, Maine, and Nevada are likely to pass recreational marijuana laws next year. We believe Massachusetts and Arizona probably will. But as we go over these two preceding slides, the states that look at it, really in most cases with the hope of passing a law in 2015, but get the issue on the books. So legislators in these states have the issue before them. They started hearing the arguments. Of course, 2015 wasn't the first time that this has happened, but a lot of states looking at not medical marijuana laws, but looking at recreational marijuana laws for the first time. And it's a concern, obviously, to employers. And we don't have time to really pause here very long, but obviously it affects drug place programs and pre-workplace services like drug testing. And so it doesn't mean that you can necessarily overturn a state law if you get enough employers interested and concerned about it, but you can have employers comply with the law and at the same time maintain a drug-free workplace program. They don't have to give up drug testing. None of these marijuana states, none of the states that have legalized marijuana prohibit drug testing. None have tried to make drug testing illegal or testing for marijuana illegal. Some so far as to try to prohibit employers from being able to take any adverse employment action against a registered medical marijuana user who's positive. But so far, and we saw that with Minnesota and New York last year, where they put very strong anti-discrimination language into those new medical marijuana laws. Incidentally, Minnesota and New York are two examples of states that, well, passing medical marijuana did not make smoking marijuana legal. So other forms of use that have been legalized for medical purposes in Minnesota and New York, not smoking marijuana. So if an employee, for example, goes in the parking lot and smokes a joint on his lunch break and he comes back reeking of marijuana smoke, he probably or she probably doesn't have a legal leg to stand on to think that they were using medical marijuana legally, because smoking marijuana in those two states by the medical marijuana laws is not legal. A lot more to come in 2016 when it comes to the whole marijuana issue. Already the wheels are turning. Go to the MPP.org website. You'll find this information on Arizona, Massachusetts, Nevada, California. It's not 2016 yet, but they're already out there collecting signatures to get the marijuana issue on the ballot for 2016. These are just 4 examples where the effort is already underway. Other states, as you saw, will carry over to next year before state legislatures. But in any cases, this will go on to the ballot for election day in November. And so in a number of states, we're going to see voters have a say on this issue. In Ohio this year, did not pass. But next year could be a completely different story with more people going to the polls. Now, we're going to last couple of minutes together talking about our 2015 Drug Testing Industry Survey. It was the 17th annual survey. We're very proud of this year's survey. We got a lot of participation and a lot of good information. If anybody's interested, we have a webinar tomorrow. We're going to have a full slide deck to cover a full 1-hour presentation, which is more time than we got at the conference to present on this. So you get more information in tomorrow's webinar than you did if you attended the SAPA conference and heard me present on it at the SAPA conference. So you're interested, sign up for tomorrow's webinar. We don't make money on it, it's free, but if you're interested in this information, sign up for the webinar tomorrow, and you'll also receive access to all the slides from tomorrow's webinar. Today, you're going to see a few. Tomorrow, you're going to get the whole slide deck and have access to it to look at after the webinar presentation. Every year, we get terrific support from the industry, from a number of companies in the drug testing business: Diagnostics, Alere Toxicology, OraSure, LifeHawk, CIS, Compliance Information Panel, BioTech and AWSI. Thank you to these companies for providing financial support, which makes it possible to do this. It's a very long, involved process to conduct these surveys throughout the year, and it wouldn't be possible without the corporate support of companies like the one on the screen here. If you're interested in being a corporate sponsor, send us an email, and we would be happy to send out information on that. When the state of the industry is, 50% considered it to be strong, healthy, vibrant, moving in the right direction, as you see on the far left of the bar graph in the blue bar there. Only 5.4% considered it to be weak, troubled, sluggish, and moving in the wrong direction. So, the majority of people who responded feel that it is a strong, healthy industry right now, moving in the right direction. As I say, if you add this up, 5.4% felt it was weak, 0.8% was stagnant and sort of in place. That comes out to about 16%. So that's not great. Of course, one in 6 or 7 right there, but it wanes in comparison to those who have sort of a real sort of positive and optimistic outlook. There are 20% who considered the industry strong but were unsure of its future, and 6.7%, the orange bar that you see there to the right, that considered it level but not sure of the future. So there are things going on right now in the United States that could affect the drug testing industry. The economy certainly is one. The legalization of marijuana is another one. The presidential election coming up certainly could have an impact on the drug testing business and industry in future years. So some justification for people being concerned, but the vast majority of people in the industry consider it to be pretty healthy and strong. You can see this is the status of background check selling in the drug testing industry. So if we, of course, did this survey among NAPBS members, it would be a completely different set of results. But even here, among drug testing providers or traditional providers of drug testing who also sell background screens, 21% felt that sales were up or indicated sales were up. 11.4% sales are the same. Only 5.7% said background screen sales are down. 8% anticipate an increase in sales in the latter part of 2015. But look at the light blue column there. 55.7% of people in the drug testing industry, they don't sell background screens. Perhaps they could. Another 5.7 said they're not very proactive about selling background checks. So that's sort of an indication of the mindset of drug testing professionals. But a lot of companies in the background screening industry, and I presented at the NAPBS conference this year, a lot of companies attended my webinar. There's definitely a strong interest, a growing interest, and I believe a growing number of background screening companies that are interested in selling and providing drug testing services. So if you're just a drug test provider or sort of a traditional drug test provider, then you've got a sort of a growing level of competition coming from the background screening industry. I think it's a healthy thing, a good thing, and oftentimes there's ways for background check providers and drug testing providers to work together. Probably the hottest issue was oral fluid testing this year because the proposed guidelines from SAMHSA for lab-based oral fluid testing came out earlier in the year, back in May, and by the time SAPA met in September, interest in this issue was at sort of a peak, and it's still really at high level. It hasn't gone down yet. But for the year, compared to 2014, 0.6% of respondents to the survey said sales were up considerably, and 26.7% said sales of oral fluid tests were up moderately. If you combine the two, that's nearly 40% of people in the industry saying that oral fluid test sales are up in 2015 compared to the previous year. Only 15% said they were the same. Only 5.6% said they were down slightly. Nobody said they were down significantly. Oral fluid testing is in a pretty strong and growing position right now in the industry. And as you can see here, this is sort of more comment-oriented. We're seeing greater interest in oral fluid testing. About a quarter of the industry, we're not seeing much, about saying 22.5%. Now that SAMHSA has issued proposed guidelines, we anticipate increased interest in oral fluid testing, a whopping 33.8%. I say whopping because I've been asking questions like this for the last 17 years, and these are some of the strongest numbers that we've seen. And it reflects a little bit of what we saw last year as well. So this isn't like the first year it's been like this, but these are strong numbers compared to where we were. When we did the first industry survey back in 1999, which I presented the results of at the SAPA conference in Long Beach, California, and I asked everybody in attendance at the SAPA conference who was there in 1999 in Long Beach, and it was a lot of people that raised their hands. So a lot of continuing support there. There's no mention of oral fluid testing in 1999 and in 2000 and in 2001. It was really something that came much later, and of course, is again sort of at a peak level of interest. 2014, 2015. I think obviously next year with the proposed guidelines being finalized, we'll see a continuing peak of interest in oral fluid testing. Of course, we're only talking about lab-based oral fluid testing because that's what the proposed guidelines will cover. Before I run out of time, let me get through these last couple of slides. Point of collection tests. Our clients typically prefer using FDA-cleared devices. I add that question in because there's a lot of controversy on that. In 2015, 30% indicated their clients prefer to use FDA-cleared devices. Our clients are typically not concerned with FDA-cleared devices, only 16%. Actually, it's a higher number than I thought it would be. Our clients tend to take our advice, and we always recommend FDA-cleared devices, 50%. So best practices on the part of the many people in the drug testing industry. As a company, we sell both FDA-cleared and non-FDA cleared, about 13%. We tend to sell the least expensive devices. As you can see, nobody was willing to admit that, 0%, probably not a very smart question to ask. My bad there. Finally, we advise clients using rapid result engine testing to confirm non-negative results with a lab confirmation, 63%. That should probably be even higher than that, but that's a good, healthy number. Methods of alcohol test do you sell? We added a lot of alcohol testing questions to this year's survey. If you're interested, let me know. But of course, as you might suspect, nearly 70% indicated breath alcohol testing. That's number one. Urine testing, surprisingly, at 26%, we don't see as much of that, but the percentage was higher than I thought it would be. Saliva testing is the red slice there at the bottom, 27.7%. A lot of employers use a combination. Typically, of course, for DOT, it's going to be mostly breath, although it can be saliva as well. And the impact of legalized marijuana, I won't take you through all of these slides because we're just about out of time here, but if you ask the questions that we asked in the 2015 survey and compare it to the questions that we asked in the 2014 survey, you see that there is a significant percentage of employers, and look at that purple bar right there, sort of to the right center, or left center. 67% of respondents to the survey said employees are, that's a typo, it should be employers. Employers are confused and worried about how to deal with marijuana in the workplace. 78%, the bar to the right, that light blue bar. Employers will start to eliminate marijuana from the drug testing panel. The orange bar, 19%, that's an increase compared to 2014, almost 20%. Some employers have already eliminated marijuana from the drug test panel. There's a lot of confusion on this marijuana issue. We need to do a better job as an industry, and there are efforts underway, both at SAPA and DAISHA in particular, to do more in the area, which is a good thing. But we've got a lot of damage control to do as an industry. And if you're in the drug testing business, you really need to be concerned about the impact of these marijuana bills that are being introduced year after year after year, because they're already, as you can see, having a negative impact on the industry. Even though to the far left, 32.8% said little or no negative impact, the matter is nearly 7 out of every 10 employers is confused and concerned about the issue, and almost 1 out of every 19.1% there have already eliminated marijuana from the drug test panel. And I can tell you, and I know we've got employers on the line too, so I don't think I'm giving any trade secrets away here, but I would say to people who are in the drug testing industry that if your clients start having, 0.01% positives or 0.04 or 5% positives compared to 4 or 5% positives when they test for marijuana, if they start getting sub 1% positive results testing for cocaine, opiates, amphetamines, even the psychotherapeutic drugs like oxycodone and oxymorphone and hydrocodone and hydromorphone, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you're going to get the positive rates that you get when you test for marijuana because marijuana use is so prevalent. Well, as your clients start to see that dramatic drop in positives, not only is that dangerous for their workplace, but I think that there'd be a significant number of employers who start to question the value of doing drug testing. I can make an argument for it, and we go another hour. There's a lot of strong arguments for it. But as somebody in the industry, you've got to be concerned about that issue. And if you're an employer, you have to ask yourself, if we're not testing for marijuana, it doesn't mean that the positives went away. People would still test positive if you tested for marijuana, but you're just now not testing for it. They're still there. They're still coming in the workplace under the influence of marijuana. And your workplace has become less safe, and your exposure to liability has increased significantly because, among other things, these marijuana laws prohibit drug testing for marijuana. The conditions that you have to live with, but none of them prohibit, nor do they prohibit, drug testing. So to choose to discontinue testing for marijuana really are making a big mistake. That's a message that people in the industry need to be able to communicate very, very clearly to people, to the companies that they're dealing with. In conclusion, one of the very popular parts of our drug testing survey every year is the brand name recognition. Tomorrow I'm going to take you through all the different categories. We'll talk about labs, we'll talk about oral fluid, hair, POCT, collection sites, electronic chain of custody providers, etc. We'll be down and we'll share the top 5 recognized brand names in all of those categories one by one. This is the total that we came up with of all the categories combined. Quest Diagnostics, the most recognized brand name, the most number 1 mentions, and actually the most number 2 mentions. We always ask as part of the survey, please mention in order the top recognized brand names 1, 2, and 3. And so it's not which one do you like the best or which one's most popular. Of course, this is not scientific. Quest is by far the most recognized brand name. If you combine all of CIS's different brands, FormFox, Red Arrow, of course, they just recently acquired EDTM through their TPA service. Number 2 recognized brand name, but it's a combination of all those brands. If you break that apart, then LabCorp and are number 2 and number 3. Okay. Finally, if you want more information about this, if we did cover a state bill that you are aware of, that you had a question of, just send an email at this address, bcurrent@currentconsultinggroup.com, or feel free to call me. Either way, we'll look it up for you, we'll find the information, we'll send you an email with the results of what we found. Again, thank you to OraSure Technologies for sponsoring today's webinar. This is one of our most popular webinars. We do it every year in December to give you an update on everything that happened for the year. And we're grateful for the support of OraSure Technologies in sponsoring today's webinar. And I will now turn the virtual microphone back over to Jessica for instructions on how to access this information going forward. Jessica?
On behalf of OraSure Technologies, we hope you found today's presentation informative and helpful. If you asked a question today that was not answered, a representative will answer your question via email. Any questions that you may have relating to today's topic may be submitted at info@currentconsultinggroup.com. That's info@CURRENT consultinggroup.com. Please the subject line OraSure's December webinar, and we will answer your questions in a timely manner. This presentation was recorded, and you will receive instructions informing you how to access the recording. Thank you for your attendance today. This concludes today's webinar.